What is your honest opinion on plugin emulations? Now, I love a plugin emulation. Now, I really do, because I'm a very much an analog hardware guy. I've got a lot of analog hardware. And to have a plugin emulation of the hardware that I use is brilliant, because I know the hardware. I know what it sounds like. I know what it does. And then to get a plugin version of it that does 95% of what that is, brilliant. I love that. It's if it actually is an emulation or just a skin. Now, there's a lot that are just a skin. For one, the old SSL Waves version of the channel strip, to me, was just a skin with a basic EQ in it. Some reason people loved it. And I think more what they loved was it's SSL. It wasn't. SSL did actually license it, but I don't think. I think if the opportunity now came to them to license it, I think maybe they'd pass that one up, just because they'd look at it and they'd use it and they'd go, this ain't an SSL EQ. The new one, I don't know about. I haven't tried it. I don't want to try it. I don't want to touch Waves products with a barge pole, because I don't want to be stuck with the constant subscription updates and all that sort of stuff. Don't want to do it. So, anyways, honest opinion on plugin emulation. I love plugin emulation. If it's done well, I love it. Even if it's not done that well, but it's done in a way that we get a good amount of what the hardware is. For instance, I mean, I love the SSL Fusion. The Fusion is a brilliant, really good tool. I've got one in both of my mastering studios. The plugins aren't identical. They're 90% there, say. They're not identical in any way, shape, or form, but they are what the Fusion is about. And it does all the controls that the Fusion does. It just doesn't achieve the exact same sound, but it achieves, let's just look at it as it achieves the plugin sound. You've got the hardware sound and the plugin sound. They're not the same. So even if they're not done especially well, take the plugin for what it is. It's the plugin version, rather than compare it to the hardware. So when you look at it that way, the plugin becomes a lot better, because there's nothing wrong. Let's face it, there's nothing wrong with a plugin that emulates the hardware to 90%, let's say. There's nothing wrong with that. If you took the name and the emulation factor out of it, it would then just be a good sounding plugin. So it's only because we compare it to the hardware that we then put it on this kind of A to B reference point of, does this one sound like this one? And if it's 90% there, it's almost there. They're never really going to be 100% identical. Now, I love how the majority of plugin emulations sound. If we step back from how they sound, how they look, I mean, I like looking at something that is emulated on a piece of hardware, because it looks like a piece of hardware. I've got the S4 behind me, so I can dial in and map the plugin exactly as the hardware looks. So I can then almost feel as though I'm on the hardware. And it very much does feel like you're using a piece of hardware. When you use an S4, you get the resistance of, you turn that dial and you can feel where that unit's going. You can feel what's happening with it, and it does feel like a piece of hardware where you're so hands-on with it. So you do get that aspect of it when you use emulations, and I just think, I'd honestly say 95% of the plugins that I use are emulations. Yeah. So I mean, I must really like emulations, and I do. I love a good emulation of a piece of hardware. I never once think, I've got the plugin, so I don't need the hardware. I think I've got the plugin, I use the plugin, let's buy the hardware because I'm going to use that. The hardware is always going to be slightly better, but plugins, multiple instances, 100th of the price. I mean, let's look at something like, I don't know, the SPL Iron. The two sound very similar, 95% there. You use the plugin, 100 instances of it or 10 instances of it in a session. The hardware is £4,000 a time. You buy one. The majority of people will just buy one. So you're not going to go, right, let's put an SPL Iron on the drum bus, let's put one on the vocal bus, and let's put one on the pads, for instance. You're not going to do that because at £4,000 a pop, they are expensive, and you can use the plugin. And when the plugin is 95% there, it's in the entirety of the mix. You don't tell 5% difference in the entirety of a mix. Believe me, you don't. When it comes to mastering, it's a different factor because you're mastering over an entire mix. There's only one, when you compare it on a master A to B, you can tell there's 95% difference. But in the mix where everything's coming together and summing together, it's very hard to hear any difference. So I like to use in the mix. I like to use a lot of plugin, and my honest opinions on hardware emulations are, I will use a hardware emulation of a piece of hardware that I like over something that isn't a hardware emulation. I like the fact that a company like SPL did the plugin called Phil's Cascade. Now, what they did there was interesting, and it was backwards. What they did was they created a piece of hardware for the purpose of emulating it into plugin. That usually doesn't happen. And then that piece of hardware never went into production. I think there's only one made, which was purposely built to build this piece of hardware to emulate into a plugin, and it came out brilliantly. It was really, really good, and it's a great plugin. But usually, hardware goes on sale, it sells lots of units, and a plugin is formed from it. That's the usual way of doing it. But I like the way that Phil's Cascade and SPL did that one. They literally built hardware in order to emulate it, and that was great. So I really enjoy plugin emulation. I prefer plugin emulation to something that's not plugin emulated, and I tend to buy plugin emulations over anything else. That's mainly because I am quite an analog nut when it comes to hardware. I like my hardware. So if I can use more instances of plugin emulation, if done well, the plugin emulation needs to be 95% at least there. And the majority of them are, some aren't. And the GUI has to look great. The more realistic it looks, the better, I think. So that's my honest opinion on plugin emulation.